All right, we are live for the first time in just over a week. I figured I'd start just a couple of minutes early. We've got a lot of things to cover today. First and foremost, I just wanted to hit that our last video, or two videos ago essentially, our Anna Walsh video has been doing really well. So I really appreciate that, everybody jumping on, getting on that train, watching that video. I know there was a lot of information in that video as well. And that was prior to Brian Walsh getting arrested for his take in her disappearance. Now, a lot of stuff is going to come out of that. Obviously, we've got time before that trial could actually hit. That is not one of the cases I'm going to hit today, but since we're on the subject, we might as well just talk about it for a moment. A lot of stuff had happened since that video. Obviously, Brian Walsh thought he was pretty smart, and he ended up getting arrested. Okay. And we'll see what happens when everything goes down. But the evidence against him didn't look very good. So there's that. Today, I wanted to hit a couple of trials, or a couple of cases that obviously are in the news right now. We've been hitting the Idaho 4. We'll continue to do that. Small updates on that, and I'll start with that first, and then we'll go into the Alex Murdaugh trials. And I was looking at a lot of cases that were out there that I wanted to cover. I've been watching a lot of cases. So obviously, like the Cabo 6 is very important. The Idaho 4, obviously we've talked about that. The Delphi murders, a lot of missing cases over the last couple of weeks. So it's not that I just disappeared. I was definitely doing a lot of research, but work's been pretty heavy lately. I've been working almost 60 hours a week. I'm heading out to Seattle next week for just about a week. So I had a lot of work to do, and I wanted to make sure that that I got a lot of stuff done at work first, because obviously we're not monetized to do this. This is a passion project, and I love doing this, so I'll continue to do that. But that's kind of my hiatus, and I appreciate that. That was a video that I was pretty proud of for sure. So I do like that. And welcome back too. I think last time we were locking down your name down to Lonnie, I think is what we came up with. So I didn't mess up your name. So that's great. But today I wanted to keep a theme, and I've got some websites that are queued up, and we'll jump into that. I won't be on super long, maybe 30 to 45 minutes. But the theme today is people that commit murders and think they're going to get away with it. So obviously you've seen it in my title. The first one's Mr. Brian Kohberger, and the second one's going to be Alex Murdaugh. I will say that both of them are innocent until proven guilty. That is for sure. I do agree with that. However, looking at the evidence in both cases, I will say that the evidence is definitely pointing in the direction of guilty for both. Now, do keep in mind, right, going through a trial, there's a lot of things that can come out, and the defense hasn't had their opportunity yet to present their case, right? Specifically in the Murdaugh trials, a lot of quote unquote bombshells came out yesterday. I don't know if they will be bombshells after the defense gets a hold of it. And then obviously in the Kohberger trial, you've heard me talk about it, a lot of circumstantial evidence, and the defense hasn't had an opportunity in court to dispute any of that or to give their rebuttals. So everything we're going off of is either the arrest affidavits or what we've seen in the trials so far and what we've seen on TV, which means there's a lot of stuff that could come out of this, right? So I'm just going to start with the Kohberger stuff that's been updated. And let me just transition here real quick. We'll get to my desktop so you can see what I've queued up. There was a couple of things that popped up since the last time that I was on that I thought was very important. And I'll kind of summarize and recap some of the things we talked about. Obviously, we talked about the 18-page affidavit, which kind of seemed like a lot compared to many of the other cases that are out there. Even the Delphi murders only had 8. So it was pretty interesting that they had 18, and that's a lot of information that they put in those affidavits, which would tell me one of two things, right? Obviously, they knew there was a lot of circumstantial evidence, and they wanted to secure their warrants and be able to make an arrest, especially out of state. And number two, and I'm leaning towards number two a little bit more, is there's a lot of evidence in this case that they're going to be able to present at trial, circumstantial or not. a lot of it is going to be pointing the way of Mr. Brian Koberger, right? But the one piece of fact that I could not wrap my mind around, if you watched a couple of my previous live streams, was how did he do this in such a short period of time? Now, if you look, the timeline, and I won't go over all of it. I know I have in the past, and I don't want to bore everybody, but basically at 25 minutes from 4 o'clock to 4:25, a couple of notables that happen. The Uber Eats driver shows up at 4, and then at 4:12, Xana is on TikTok. So we know that something had to have happened between that. And it wasn't even 4:25. It was 4:20 when his car was seen on tape again. So there was a 20-minute period. You also got to look at the timeline between him parking his car, going into the house, something happening, coming out, and then being spotted on camera again, which would shorten that time down to, maybe 18 minutes or 16 minutes, depending on how much time it took to get into that house, right? So for me, just thinking through things, not being an investigator, I was thinking like 16 minutes, right? And I've read some reports out there that it doesn't take long. Like 6 minutes would have been plenty enough to murder 4 people and get out of that house. And that was hard. That was hard for me to wrap my mind around. And I looked at that and I sat on that for probably 2 weeks since my last video. But I did like this article here out of Newsweek, and I'm going to read some of this to you, where basically the ex-FBI agent comes out and says, hey, look at a wrestling match. It is absolutely crazy that a wrestling match, a 2-minute round, feels like forever, right? And I'm going to read that out to you. And yes, Lonnie, to your point, 4:04 entering and 4:20 leaving, that's 16 minutes. That doesn't include the time to walk up to the house, get in the house, and then find your way through the house. And obviously there's a lot more stuff that goes into that. Absolutely. Right. Like, was he in the house prior? Did he show up to a party? We don't know any of that right now. But even if he did, how did he know where they would be at? Did he just assume they were going to be in the rooms that they were in? Did something happen where he goes upstairs and commits the first murder? Obviously Dylan at that point probably had heard that, if you look at the affidavit, and then comes downstairs and runs into Xana because, maybe she had picked up her food, put the food downstairs, was going to go eat with Ethan. Who knows, right? There's a lot of speculation with that, but really, like 6 to 8 minutes to commit this crime. To me, it's hard to wrap my mind around it, but I read this article and I was like, I've got to get this out because this article is so interesting on how fast something could happen, right? So I'm not going to read the whole thing. Obviously, it shows a lot of the timeline stuff, just like you said, Lonnie. They have 4:25, but you're absolutely right. Everything I've read has been 4:20. So that's one correction I would make in this article, is that it was 4:20 where we see the car, and then to your point, it was 4:04 when they seen the car entering the neighborhood, and right here, and then the Uber Eats driver was there at 4 a.m. roughly, right? So some of their timelines is a little bit off, so I get that. They were right on the 4:12, at least according to the arrest affidavit, so we'll give them that one right there. But the piece that I wanted to see is this right here. So the killer had 8 minutes to commit the Idaho stabbings, right? And this is what she wrote on Twitter. Many run a mile in 8 minutes, and I've never correlated that. Like, you can run a mile in 8 minutes. Yes, and I've done that before, right? I'm not a 4-minute or a 5-minute mile runner. Obviously, 4-minute, I'd be in the Olympics. But either way, a wrestling match. This is the one that stuck out to me. A wrestling match has 2-minute periods. To watch the violence for 2 minutes seems like forever, and for the wrestler, it's an eternity. He had a knife and unleashed rage. 8 minutes was plenty of time. Now, although I don't really view a wrestling match as violent per se, there's definitely physical contact, but I think it's much more controlled. I can talk about, when I was in fights when I was younger, especially growing up in Canada, a lot of fist fights where I came from. I was from northern British Columbia. A lot of differences were solved that way. And I will tell you that a 1 or a 2 minute fight did feel like an eternity, right? And it was just absolutely crazy if a fight went on for 5 minutes. That just felt like a lifetime. And it took that, and it really took this statement right here for me to wrap my mind around how fast something could happen, because I just couldn't, right? No, obviously, I've never been in that situation to want to murder somebody with a knife and find 4 people. That in itself is hard to wrap my mind around. Like, what are you sitting at home at night and you come up with this plan to do this? I think we'll find out more. I don't know if we're going to find out motive. We don't have to prove motive in any case anyways, but what makes somebody do this? Is it something like they just snapped? Is it, I don't know. That I can't wrap my mind around. I don't know if I'll ever be able to wrap my mind around that anyways, but just that timeline was just leaving me like, wow, what can change your life in 6 to 8 minutes, right? Is absolutely crazy. And then to your point, right? Doesn't include the time he spent in the parked car, prepping, putting on the mask, gloves, shoe covers, retrieving the knife, etc. And then the time for the ingress, egress. Yes, you're absolutely right. Like, it doesn't include that time. Then the other thing, there's been a couple of other rumors. Again, these aren't in the affidavit, and I'll state this. If it's not in the affidavit, it really doesn't count. So this is just my opinion. But, the knife sheath, did he leave that there on purpose? That's one of the statements that are out there. And then a lot of people are saying that it was Maddie that he was actually targeting, not Kaylee. And I haven't seen any evidence to see either one of these. That's just speculation that I'm hearing out there. I read about the case every day. There hasn't been a lot of new information. A lot of it's opinion that's coming out. And then a lot of the streamers that I watch, are coming out with their own theories. I don't really have a theory for this. I do, but not theories that I want to share because, again, it's opinion. And, I could change that, and it might not age well as we see more evidence come out in these cases, right? And I'm watching a lot of cases right now. All the ones that I've named. There's some that I haven't talked about, like the Cabo 6 is really interesting to me as well. And those I just try to keep my opinions to myself because, again, in the spirit of innocent until proven guilty, opinions sometimes just can really sway things. And at the end of the day, I will say, though, a lot of the evidence is pointing in that way. So before I move on to the Murdaugh trials, that's all I wanted to get out from the Idaho 4, but I wanted you to think about this, right? Do we think that Bryan Kohberger did it, number one? And you don't have to answer that because that's opinion. And if so, do we think that Bryan Kohberger thinks that he is smarter than the authorities, the court system, and us people that are watching all of this unfold? Right? And that's why I think that there is definitely a theme with these 2 trials because, look, we know that Mr. Kohberger was going after his PhD in criminology, right? So that would tell us that he might think he's above the law. Again, we don't know if he's done this. He hasn't been proven guilty, but I will say again, the evidence is definitely pointing his way, and it's not pointing in any other directions at this point. So, speculation, just my opinion. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. I love when you guys are putting stuff in here because at the end of the day, it could change my perspective. And that's why I love having my channel because my channel is open for debate. It is open for different perspectives and it is open for the community to be able to provide feedback. That's what makes it fun and that's what makes it a passion project for me. Let me read this out real quick, though. For someone who isn't a trained athlete, they are exhausted after a 3-minute round, much less 2 rounds back-to-back, and he isn't in a hurry to leave. Dylan witnessed him walking past her, not fleeing. And he's navigating through a dark house, 4 a.m, a house he's unfamiliar with. I fumble with light switches. Yeah, no, those are 2 very good points. And I didn't think about this until you just brought this up, though. Somebody who isn't an athlete, they would be exhausted. And who knows what happened when he did, because he wasn't fleeing. He walked past Dylan. And who knows if he actually even saw Dylan. And I don't mean that like just with his eyes. But to your point, after wrestling with 4 people, because we don't know what the crime scene looks like. We've heard that it's been pretty brutal and gruesome, which means there had to be a lot of energy that was extended there. Was he just so exhausted that he just had the blinders on and couldn't pay attention to anything that was going on in the house? Or maybe it was just like, I'm done. I got to get out of here. Because clearly, like you said, he wasn't fleeing, so he wasn't panicking. But he might have been totally exhausted where, one, he just didn't have the energy to go after Dylan. Or was he just walking by and just didn't notice her? Again, I've done that when I'm so tired. Like I see it, but I don't notice it, or it registers after. That's a really good point right there, what you just said there. And exactly, 4 a.m, it's dark, you're fumbling through. And I do that in my own house as well. Like, oh, did I miss a light switch? So those are really good points that you bring up, and I appreciate that. And then another one, and I didn't touch on this. I was going to save this one, but you're bringing it up, okay? If he did do it alone, so before I even read the rest of that out, is there an accomplice? So I have been seeing this on the news, and I have been studying this, and I just can't come to the conclusion yet that there was more than one person for a couple of different reasons. One, Dylan said that she had only saw one. And is it a possibility that somebody left prior or after she shut her door? Absolutely it is. I just don't think so. I think that at this point, if that was the case, I think we'd hear more about it. But again, I was wrong about the car, and I'll say that all day. I didn't think the car, the Elantra, had as much significance as it did. So I could be dead wrong here. There could have been an accomplice, and they might be looking for the accomplice right now and not releasing that to the public because it's such an important piece. So very good points that you put in there today, for sure. And those are definitely going to make me think through some other things. So let's move on from this one, though. I want to get your take, right, on the Alex Murdaugh murders. Okay. This is pretty crazy to me. This one, I started reading about this long before the Idaho 4, obviously. This one was kind of concerning to me when I I came across Paul Murdaugh's case before Paul Murdaugh was murdered. Okay. So if you remember back, and maybe you don't, so I'll just hit it. Basically, this young kid borrowed his dad's boat and went out and, he was drinking and he basically got into a boating accident, and one of his friends, fell out of the boat. 3 of them fell out, but one passed away. Okay. And I'm going to read this out to you folks in just a minute, but if we go back to prior to that happening, just some background on Mr. Murdaugh. You can see it right here. Alex Murdaugh, 54, the once powerful scion of the South Carolina legal dynasty, is on trial for the slayings of his wife and son. So this guy, right, is above the law already. So he's a lawyer, right, and legal dynasty. So they basically, if you go read the stories on this guy, they have been part of this town and part of South Carolina law for just about a century, right? His parents before him, his dad, all of this stuff, right? And they were powerful. Like, there's stories out there about, them swaying and changing laws. And, this is definitely one of the things that you can look at for privilege, power, money, and just really believing that rules don't apply to you. Okay. This would be a very good example of, possibly, how somebody would live their life knowing that they hold that much power. So you kind of rewind a little bit, and before Alex Murdaugh was put on trial, back, I think it was 2017. So I was wrong, 2014. So I'm going to read this out to you, and I know it might be a little bit boring, but I think this puts a lot of context into the case, and it brings up a lot of questions, and we'll hit some of those. And definitely, if I'm off base, just let me know. But it began on February 24th, 2019, when Paul Murdaugh, after attending an oyster roast and stopping to get a few drinks, drunkenly crashed his dad's boat with 5 of his friends aboard. At least 3 passengers were launched into the water, including Mallory Beach, whose body was found a week later by 2 fishermen miles from the crash site. I highly suggest you go read that story, because there's a lot of stuff in that story that might start getting you to question things. This was on, I can't remember if it was 2020 or 48 Hours. This had its own show prior to Alex Murdaugh ever being arrested. So we knew who Alex Murdaugh was before that because of the Paul Murdaugh case. Okay. The incident set shockwaves throughout Hampton County. Paul was charged with boating under the influence, and a lawsuit named his father. Now, this is where Alex Murdaugh comes into play. The civil case sought Alex Murdaugh's financial record Documents that would prosecutors allege show that he had accrued substantial debts over a period of years, and to cover those debts began engaging in illicit financial crimes involving theft and misappropriation of money from his clients and his own law firm. If the civil litigation motion was granted as expected, that motion would have resulted in the exposure of Murdaugh's financial records, which would itself had led to his misdeeds becoming known to others. Very important stuff right here, right? So on June 7th, 2021, the pressure of Alex Murdaugh increased as he was asked by a law firm colleague for an explanation no later than that day as to where hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees owed to the firm but stolen by Murdaugh had gone. So think about that, right? And I want you to remember that day, June 7th, 2021. Murdaugh had neither the money nor a plausible legal explanation with which to respond to the demand. All right, so this gets better, right? So on this same day, but the questions about the missing money would have to wait. Dun, dun, dun. Prosecutors say that Murdaugh suddenly got a call from his dad that had been taken to the hospital with very poor prognosis, a scenario that threatened to ruin him because his father had loaned him money and co-signed his loans. Just hours later, on the very same day, sorry, I'm spitting here, at 10:07 p.m., authorities say Alex Murdaugh called the police and reported his wife and child had been shot on their 1,770-acre county estate, and they were not breathing. Within seconds of officers arriving at the crime scene, Murdaugh was trying to suggest the killer's motive stemmed from the February 2019 boat wreck that resulted in the tragic death of Mallory Beach. Okay? That is absolutely crazy. So think of that day, right? So that June night, he's questioned by somebody in the law firm, where did this money go? Show us where the money went. Okay, we know about it because you were named in a lawsuit that your son was being implicated for, right? In a civil lawsuit because Mallory Beach's parents were suing, as they should, right? Drunken driving. He was charged for it. When I say he, Paul. And in that lawsuit, they name Alex Murdaugh. Now, when they name him, they want to see the financial records. When they pull the financial records, it shows that there's been money that's been kind of moved around and there's money that's missing, and maybe he doesn't have quite as much money as it was thought in the first place. Now, I don't know much about that trial, right? Because it's still ongoing, and you'll see that in the trial today, in the murder trial. They haven't proven the fraud, but somebody is out to get him at this point, right? Because at the end of the day, they want to know where this money's at. And if he's out almost $1 million, right, then that means people are owed money somewhere, whether it be the people that are working in his law firm, no matter what it is, right? There's money that's missing. People are going to want to know this. So, okay, this is all happening in the same day. So let's recap. And you tell me, maybe I'm crazy. One, he gets questioned about it from his own law firm, right? And is told that he has until the end of the day to come up with a plausible reasoning why the money has moved, right? Which we know he couldn't do. Obviously, he's going to go to a lawyer or hire a lawyer. Keep in mind, he is a prominent lawyer, so he's going to know a lot of these steps, but still, even lawyers are going to request counsel because it's going to be smart, right? Two, he says his dad gets very ill. His dad being the one that's co-signing for loans, he's got a stake in the game to see how his dad is. Okay, that same day. Three, both his wife and his son are murdered. Okay, couple other things that you're not going to see in here, and you might, and we'll see this in just a second. Was Alex Murdaugh planning this for a period of time? Did he plan it in the moment, or maybe he started planning it that day? There's a couple of things that stick out to me. One, how was his wife and son killed with two separate weapons? So the story goes, or in the court affidavit, you're going to see one was a shotgun and one was a long rifle, right? And I didn't get the caliber, but when I say a long rifle, think of like a 30-06 or a 303 or, something like that, right? Compared to a shotgun. So killed two different people with two different guns. Is that possible? Absolutely. Would he have done that to lead investigators in a different way? That's a possibility. Okay. Another thing that comes up in the trial that we saw I think it was yesterday when we were watching it, was that if you look at the clothes that, I don't want to say he was arrested, because he wasn't arrested in. He was basically escorted by police because he was going to go give a statement. He was wearing that white shirt and shorts, but in the Snapchat video earlier on, he was wearing essentially like what I'm wearing, like a button down or like a nicer shirt and slacks, right? Or pants. Now, when asked in the trial if they were able to recover those clothes, they said no, they didn't recover those clothes when they went in and executed their search warrant. So that was interesting to me, because does that tell you right there, like, hey, maybe they just happened to disappear? Or maybe when they were doing it on Snapchat, they put a filter on, changed the color. That's a possibility too, right? A lot of social media allows you to do that. Or did the clothes just disappear? Did he burn them? Who knows, right? There's not really an explanation for that happening. But that's a lot of stuff that's pointing his way so far. Now, yesterday, the quote unquote bombshell video that came out, right? And I want to caution that before I say bombshell. I don't know if that's a bombshell video. I really don't. I watched it a couple of times. It's about a minute long. You see them going out to their kennel, and I think it's supposed to be Paul's hand, because you hear Paul talking into the video essentially. And you can tell it's taken on the phone, and it looks like it's either going to go up on TikTok, Instagram, or like YouTube Short, just based off of, if you see the video and you see like they blur out the sides. That's typically what happens when you're doing a short on YouTube. It'll do it kind of backwards, where it'll do like 920 by 1080. So that way it's like elongated. And it looked like he was taking a video for that. Now, in the video, you hear the witnesses come in. There was 2 different witnesses that said they could hear Alex Murdaugh's voice. Now, you heard Jesse say this from Crime Network, that Alex Murdaugh definitely has a voice that's very distinguishable. And I would say, yeah, absolutely, 100%. You hear his voice, you know that that's him. Right. And we also know that, based off watching the case yesterday, that there wasn't really a rebuttal to that. Like, there wasn't a lot of pushback on that. And we've seen that in other news articles, and that's not revolutionary. Right. But to me, I'm thinking through all of this stuff is that video the smoking gun? I don't think it is. And we're going to go back to some other things here in a moment, but I want you to think through that video. What does that video really tell us? So one, okay, Paul is out by the kennels minutes before he's killed. Now, keep in mind, that's an estimation of when he would have been killed, based off of when the authorities were called, when the coroner got out there, and then when they did the autopsy on the body. They can do an approximate time of when they're killed. Now, are they pretty accurate? Yeah, 100%. No question, right? I get it. But are they accurate down to the minute? I would say that there's definitely some flaws or some liability room that we would put in there. And that could be, give or take, I would say anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, right? So in all actuality, I think it was 10:07 if we go back, when the police were called, right? And I think that the tape or the video was 8:44. So that's a lot of time in between that could have happened. And for me, when I'm thinking through that stuff, I'm like, if they didn't get it wrong, or they did get it wrong, then, maybe it was closer to 9:30 or 9:45 when they were shot, right? And maybe Alex Murdaugh was out by the kennels. Now, if we look at the Brian Kohberger case that we just discussed, it took Brian Kohberger, if he's the one that did it, let's just say the suspect. It took the suspect 8 minutes to go in and kill 4 people. And he did it with a knife, right? Or at least that's what the timeline's showing. What we've got is a video at 8:44, and we have the authorities called at 10:07, and we have a crime that, essentially is going to be pinpointed at about 9 o'clock from the coroner. So I would say, give or take, let's even go on caution on the side of a delta of 30 minutes. That could have been 8:30. Obviously, it doesn't happen at 8:30 because it's 8:44 when we see stuff, or it could have been like 9:30. So that's still almost an hour. So even if we hear Alex's voice, Is that smoking gun? No. Do I think it is a piece of evidence that shows that Alex Murdaugh could be the murderer? Yes, I absolutely do. Because a couple of things in the case, he said he was never out at the kennel. So this does prove that he was at the kennel at some point. But I think the defense is going to come back and say, hey, look, do we know that that video was taken at that time? You know, could the phone be wrong? Could the cell phone towers be pinging at the wrong time? Those are all real possibilities. There is a level of margin of error when you look at technology, and then there's a margin of error when you're looking at the coroner as well. So could the timelines be off a little bit? Absolutely. So the argument could be, well, yeah, if that happened at 8:44, did he go right back to the house at that point? Or was it a quick trip and maybe he forgot that he did that and he was working on something and then all of a sudden he came out and saw his wife and son murdered? I don't know about you. If I saw that, I'd be devastated. I don't know if I would remember what happened up until that point, right? So would that be a possible defense? Yeah, I think it would be a possible defense. So do I think it's smoking gun? No, I don't think it's smoking gun. I think that it definitely hurts the defense, but I don't think that's smoking gun, okay? But let's look at some of the other evidence, and I want to ask you folks. So, you know, in your opinion, if you're on the jury and you see that somebody changed their clothes from around 7 o'clock, because I think the original Snapchat video was between 6 and 7:30ish. I don't remember the exact time, and I'm pretty sure that the timeline's in here. But, you know, for all case and for our opinion, we'll just say prior to 8:44, Alex was wearing a different set of clothes, you know, a button down and some slacks, right? Then when he is with the police and he's given a statement, he's in a white shirt and he's got shorts on, right? Did he change because he committed a murder? What happened to his original clothes? Second thing is he smart enough to use two different guns, right? That's a huge thing, right? To me, that's pretty brilliant if you think about it. But somebody that is a prominent lawyer like that, do you think they would think through that prior to committing a crime? I think they would. Or I think they would be smart enough to think through that would lead them somewhere else or lead them off of their back, okay? Another thing that I want to think through, and I think that is the biggest piece of evidence, not smoking gun, but if you look at the actual time frame of pressure, so you can see the pressure building. Think back at 2019 when Paul, you know, essentially killed that girl, Mallory, right? That puts a lot of pressure on a family that within itself, right? Because I think he was 17 at the time, using daddy's boat, drinking, probably shouldn't have been drinking. Whatever happened. And then if you actually read the story of Paul, he didn't really have a big heart when all of this went down. Like, he wasn't an innocent victim that was like, hey, you know, sorry that happened. He was kind of more like nose in the air. I'm privileged. You know, I'm going to get away with this. My family name, that kind of stuff. Okay. Somewhere in there as well, you'll see that another person was murdered. And this is crazy. It gets crazier if you go read these stories. Essentially disappeared right around the Murdaugh farms. So you can go read on that. I won't bring that up, but these are all things that happened prior to the son and the wife getting murdered. So if you're Alex Murdaugh, you've got a prominent family name in South Carolina. You've got this practice that you're working through, and you know all of these things are adding up. Now you got to come up with $1 million because people are putting pressure on you. Your son makes a major mistake, and that opens you up to civil liability. People are going to sue. They're going to want some of your money. And believe me, after that, there is definitely going to be a jury out there that's going to say, hey, look, there's some money that is granted and you've been given quite the good life. And now you've taken somebody's life. We're going to give money. That was very possible that was going to happen. They looked at financial records. The pressure hits. Where in that does Alex Murdaugh decide, I am going to go home. I'm going to take care of Paul, which will shut down that case. And if I kill my wife at the same time, I'm going to get insurance money. This is going to put me back into the black, essentially. Right? Not saying he did it. He's on trial right now. But I will say everything up until today in this trial is pointing to Alex Murdaugh being guilty. Now, I do think that there's some things that are happening within the trial that maybe because he was a lawyer, he was smart. One, he changed his clothes. No matter what, if he kept his clothes on and he did murder his family and kept those clothes on, that would have been the dumbest thing to do, right? Let's be honest, right? Keep those clothes on, they find blood splatter, whatever. That would have been a lot harder to talk away or to get rid of, especially with DNA. As a lawyer, he would know it's easier to explain that he's in different clothes, because he could just say, right? We heard Jesse say this on Crime Now. He could just literally say how many people after they're done work go home and change their clothes. And I'll be honest, I was thinking about doing that myself, but I was like, hey, I'm going to go live. I'll change after. I'll put a hoodie on after. And I own like 7 hoodies, and you've seen all the hoodies, so I didn't want to just keep recycling the same hoodies for these videos. But so I was like, oh, I'll just wear what I wear to work, right? So that would be a great defense versus finding blood on clothes. So I don't know. You let me know. Yeah, it appears that every male member of that family were horrible in how they treated others and acted beyond the laws of society. Yes, this is a very good point. Very good point. The more you read into this, I don't have enough time. I mean, I could go on for hours about this case because there's so much that happens before Alex even goes on trial. But you're absolutely right. Like, there's so many people they don't treat well, from housekeepers to, essentially, like you said, the male members of the family just didn't treat people. They were higher than life. They were privileged. You're not going to tell them anything, and that's a sad fact, right? And some might say that they've earned some of that through money and through a century of whatever it is that they did. But I think that justice is going to be served in this case. And I don't think that a jury of my peers, right, or a jury of Alex's peers are not going to see through what's happening. Now, do keep in mind when we watch this trial, like today, a lot of the trial was them talking through what could be introduced into the court and what could be introduced to the jury. And that's all done without the jury. That's going to be a closed session. So we do get to hear a lot more information than the jury does. But realistically, out of all the stuff we've covered up to this point, without having the defense yet, because there's going to be some defense that comes into this, and we may change our minds. And next week, we might be back on here saying, man, that Alex guy, you know what? He was innocent, right? Is he a good guy morally? Probably not. Does he have his ethics intact? I would question that. But was he guilty? Probably not, right? So that could happen. But for everything that we're seeing right now, I don't know. I think everything's pointing his way. And I think that these two cases here, both Brian Kohberger and Alex Murdaugh, have the jury stacked against them. And I don't know. I think they've done it to themselves. I think there's a lot of circumstantial evidence in both cases. I don't think there's a smoking gun. Like, I really don't think there's a smoking gun. Like, there's not a weapon that has fingerprints on it or a weapon that's recovered that's showing that they're tied back to those. Now, could there be? Absolutely. Will we hear more evidence? Absolutely, we will. But I do think that we have two people here that think that they can outsmart the court system. And I think that I think you're right. I think that drugs did affect Alex's brain, Kane. I think that at the end of the day, I think power, I think greed, I think the way that they were raised and the way that they treated people. And don't get me wrong, I've grown up with folks that have had a lot of money, right? And I didn't come from a lot of money, single mom. And I was treated very well by those folks. Like, I never felt like, I was beneath them because of that kind of money. But all the stories for the Murdaugh folks, just like Lonnie said, all the males really seem to be horrible to people. And I don't know if that's crime or greed or money or whatever it is. And then Sebastian, I appreciate that. I'm going to try to keep more streams coming, and we'll get some more videos up here once I get back from Seattle next week. But I do appreciate you coming in. So not to bore you folks, I'm going to wrap this up pretty quick. I will say that this has been pretty interesting with all the evidence that we're seeing with the clothes, with the weapons, the timeline for Alex Murdaugh, the history prior to going to court, I think is huge, right? And now keep in mind, just like they were arguing in court today, a prior case or a prior crime, shouldn't be brought into court to prove the crime that's happening today, with some exceptions. Obviously, if fraud was the leading reason for Alex to commit those murders, then that should be introduced to the jury. If not, the jury shouldn't hear about his previous cases. I do agree with that, but I would say that all the pressure is building up on him. I don't know how I would handle that pressure. Again, I've never been in a position to steal $1 million or more either. So, I can't say how I would act. I can't wrap my mind around killing your own family over money, because money is still just money, no matter how much you owe. Those are people that, like his son, 22 or 23 years old, like that's a sad one. So if he's proven guilty, that'll definitely be a sad day for me. And, I think all the evidence is pointing his way, but that's just my opinion. But I'll have a hard time wrapping my mind around that one. It's just like, again, going back to the Idaho 4, I have a hard time wrapping my mind around how somebody could even come up with an idea to do that. And I know there's a lot of crimes out there that we've covered and even covered on my channel that I'm just like, wow, some people are a little crazy from a mind perspective. So here's what I'm going to leave you with. This case is still going on right now. We have a lot of room in between some of the cases that are happening, and I will bring you some different cases next week. I will definitely give you some updates on this case. We'll talk about the Idaho 4. Now, this won't be until Friday, and Lonnie, I do appreciate that. I hope to enjoy Seattle as well. I'll be back next Friday, so I'll do a live stream probably next Friday. Friday, same time, 5 p.m., and we'll talk about where this case is at that point. And then if there's anything updated in the Idaho 4, a couple other cases that I am watching is obviously the Cabo 6. I think the Cabo 6 has a lot of craziness that's going on. And I think the case is going from one end to the other. There's things that were stated at the beginning that are being changed, and I just don't have enough information to bring out to you folks to have a really solid opinion on it. And a big factor of that is that the crime happened in Mexico, and we're just not getting the details that would really bring forth that entertainment value and to come up with a good opinion. My opinion is that, her friends obviously committed the crime, but was it intentional or not? I don't know, because the story's been changing so much on that one. When I do get more information that I'm comfortable bringing forward, we'll definitely cover the Cabo 6 too, because I think that's a pretty interesting case. And then obviously I'm looking to see where we're going to be at with Anna Walsh. A very sad story in that one. Again, another one I just couldn't wrap my mind around with Brian Walsh. So we'll look at where those cases are. If there's any progress, I'll definitely bring them to you. And then this weekend, I'm going to work on a couple of videos. I would appreciate if you folks definitely take a look at that. Again, this channel is made out of passion. It's not monetized. I hope to get there one day, but I do love, talking true crime. That being said, I want to hear your feedback. If there's ways that we can improve the content, the entertainment value, and what we're bringing forth in either live streams or videos, just let me know. It could be sound, and I am working on sound this year. I am going to get some sound boards that, or sound deadening boards that I'll put up on the wall when I get an opportunity. You've seen that we've painted the wall since we've started. Anything like that, we'll definitely keep working towards, because your feedback is important. So on that note, I do appreciate your time today. It's about 41 minutes in. I'm going to end it there. I do appreciate everybody coming in. Thank you for leaving all of that information. Lonnie, there's a lot of things I need to go through as well. And then really nice to meet you, Kane and Sebastian. I appreciate you folks coming in, and we will